I imagine today people might be a little behind. The traffic out there is pretty horrible, but
yeah, and so
yeah. I took an Uber over here because it's raining, and I just sat at the light that's on the corner through 2 cycles, and I was like, you know what? I'll just walk from here. It'll be okay.
Which lights is that?
It's right, the one. Well, now I'm hold on, disoriented. So when you're coming into the building, so where I saw you, the one right behind me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know what street that is. Probably 14th. Yeah.
14.
Yeah. Yep. It just sat there. We just watched the light go and the walk sign go and turn back off again. So.
Interesting. I don't have an intuition for how that works.
Yeah.
Like, how does it unstuck itself? How does it
eventually get out of that situation? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I do know that there are a lot of algorithms that exist that can help humans to be a lot more successful in traffic. So, like, traffic congestion on the highway, a lot of it is about finding the gap to let people come on at full speed.
Yeah.
So, like, you have your traffic that's coming, and the people who are coming on, they need a gap. And the problem is if you have too many people that are trying to come on at once, they don't allow enough gaps around, like, the entire beltway for that to happen. So that's where you'll see, like, this car can go stop, this car can go stop. You've seen those probably, right? Where, like, they let one lane go at a time.
Yeah.
What they're trying to solve is that problem. They're trying to create larger gaps so that people can come on at full speed. People still are horrible at it. So that's where, like, autonomous vehicles should have a massive advantage over us, especially when they can all talk to each other, because they can say, hey, a gap is coming. Let me go and speed into that gap. And I'll wait here until that shows up. Right?
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I went to a talk last week that Axios was hosting around safety and AI and where things are at and
Yeah.
how long it's going to take.
What did you learn?
It was really interesting. It was mostly very rehearsed key messages from the people that were on stage.
Okay.
I didn't feel like you got anything from being there that you couldn't just get from
News outlets and reading a little bit online. Yeah.
But I mean, it does force you to sit there and focus and think about it.
Yeah, for a few minutes. Yeah.
So yeah, nothing new. But they did allude to some of the policy things that they want moved on. So, for example, one of the guys was talking about like transport industry needs some spectrum, radio spectrum that doesn't get used for anything else. That is solely used for communication between these machines.
So that it's harder to hack? What is so that
there's nothing else that could cause interference with those communications.
Yeah.
And so, like, as an example of something that they are lobbying on, I guess, and want to get a win for is like, hey, this is going to be revolutionary. It's going to be so important. We should dedicate some resources to this. It's worth it.
Yep.
Kind of argument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably true. From a bandwidth perspective, that makes a lot of sense. Like, Google tried to do that for their Wi-Fi a while ago. They tried to get a spectrum that they could use for their Wi-Fi that they put out into communities, so that they would be the only thing on there. So they had more broadband. Like, there's, they can use all of their spectrum. Nobody else is trafficking there and polluting it, which would make sense, I guess, for traffic too. The cars, right? There's going to be a whole bunch of people who are sitting within this certain spectrum. There's only so much data you can send at a time. So yeah, I don't know, man. I'm excited about that stuff. I think it's going to be really cool when it comes out. But
it was interesting. There was an Axios, I think it was an director actually, that was interviewing these people, and she was like, we've got to get over this hurdle of public feeling safe around this, and alluding to those studies where people get more pissed off at an AI driving.
Yeah, flaming. Yeah.
And getting close to the pedestrian crossing or whatever than they would with a human.
Yeah.
She's alluding to this. It's like, my phone still drops calls occasionally. How do we get comfortable that, even if you've got this spectrum to yourself, that's going to work? And he was like, that's totally get that point, but there's so much redundancy built into it. We've got LiDAR.
They have like 12 different sensors.
All this redundancy, but it is such an interesting one because it's so complicated
to
try and put across in a way that gets the public on board with pilots or what is
Yeah, because that's the big thing, right? Like, we have had this technology for pilots for a long time. They keep putting pilots on the plane because people won't get on the plane if there's not a pilot, right?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know that there's going to be as big of a resistance, and maybe it's like just economically it's easier, right? Whereas you'd need 200 of me to make that viable for a plane trip, right? And so there may be, because you don't need as many people to actually buy into this, they can actually get it out into the public and get people to buy into it. But there is, of course, still the people who are on the road who are interacting with, but that happens right now. Like, already we have buses and stuff.
Yeah.
Technically, I guess they have drivers still at this point, safety drivers or whatever. But
what I couldn't have heard is that the first real mass use cases of AVs will be in bike lanes, and there'll be small vehicles going low speeds that are not capable of doing too much damage, and it just might be it might be easier to get across the line quickly, even if the technology is there for full-on automobiles or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know though, because like right now, HN, you're stuck downstairs? Okay, I'll be down in a second.
How are you going with everything?
Good. Yeah. I was just trying to clean up my notes so I can make sure I have everything.
Yeah. Hey.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Thank you.
The rain's a lot worse than Silver Spring.
What's up?
So the rain's a lot worse than Silver Spring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you manage to get in okay? Were you in the car?
Yeah, good. Hey.
Hey, how's it going?
All right, to give other people a chance to show up before we get into everything, does anybody have any questions from the labs they're working on, or general questions about what they're reading, or general questions about technologies, or anything?
Definitely need more practice with like the fixed box stuff.
Okay.
In order to.
So we're gonna do more of that today. So that's good. Here's the thing I'll tell you about Flexbox though. Nobody uses it anymore. So it's one of those things that you'll run across because it exists on legacy sites, but really. So Flexbox. Yeah. So Flexbox people use Flex display Flex. That's not used or floating things. I'm sorry. Floating things is not used anymore. Flexbox is still used. That's all good. It does take a little bit to wrap your mind around it. There is a new thing called Grid, Display Grid, which works similarly to Flexbox, but allows for a little bit more wrapping to happen. Yeah. So we'll go over both of those things. We'll spend more time on both of those. We really won't get to that till next time. So, yeah.
And is that sort of considered native CSS? If you wanted to use Bootstrap or something, you can use?
It is. So, generally speaking, a framework will implement a version of Flexbox. So they're writing Flexbox stuff behind the scenes in the CSS, and then all you really need to do is say, give certain classes to your elements, and they'll just do the right Flexboxy thing. So usually you'll do something like have a class. You'll have a div that'll have a class of row, and then inside there you'll have some divs with a class of like column 25, and then you'll have a couple more, right? And so what this will say is, hey, I want to create a row, and I'm probably going to have 4 columns that are 25% of the width each, and maybe I'll leave one of those columns so that it's grow.
Yeah.
And so depending on the size of the other columns, it'll grow or shrink depending on what the content of those columns actually is.
And that's an example of Bootstrap that talks to.
Yes. So Bootstrap will have created a class called row, and then a couple classes called column 25, etc. And what they're actually doing is saying, whenever I have a row, I want to make it have display flex, and then I want to default it to be, which is the actual default for flex, but I want it to be flex direction of row.
Yeah.
And then I'll have another one for column, and it'll say, and I want it to have a flex direction of column.
Yeah.
What's Bootstrap that you're talking about?
Bootstrap is a CSS framework that's pretty commonly used. So I'll bring it up real quick.
I have learned.
If we go. It's been a while since I've used this. I'm not sure where it is. Let me see. Flex. There we go.
Cool. Can you paste that on Slack?
Yeah.
You know,
So Bootstrap, so it has a grid system, which is a commonly used thing. This has been around since even before Flexbox,
sure.
Which was just like you're going to have a row. And in Bootstrap's case, they took a grid 12 approach, which meant in general assume that there are 12 columns across your row, and you can say how many columns you want to take up with this row. So you could have 2 columns. One would have a class of column-6, the other would have column-6 as well, and they would take up 50% of the space. And that way you could have a lot of control over how much space you wanted to take. It's basically like creating a table without actually creating a table in your HTML.
Okay.
And then Flexbox came out, and basically what most of these guys have done is largely just taken their grid system and applied Flex to them, which gives them some additional advantages, makes it easy for them to do like that grow class or wrap, so you can have these things wrap underneath of each other when they expand past. So if you're dynamically generating columns, for example, and you get to the end of your row, so you've taken up all the space that the row has, then you potentially want the next column to just go to the next line. And Flex makes it very easy for that to happen. You just say Flex wrap, and it wraps whatever's underneath.
Cool.
Yep. We'll go through this. I mean, this is mostly next time's lesson, but we will go through it all. But yeah, I can put this in Slack and pin it. There's others like this. So another one that's pretty commonly used is called foundations. And then there's another one called Foundation. What framework you're using to create your website. So if you're using Angular, there's Angular Material, which is it's a JavaScript framework for creating apps quickly. But like Angular Material is very similar to Bootstrap, but it relies on the Angular framework, and it uses material design, which is a Google best practice for how to create elements on a page. So for example, you see this like highlighting piece that's happening there. That's a material design thing. They say anything that you click on, it should have this nice animation that lets you know where you're pressing, essentially. And then when you this is another material design thing. When you focus onto a field, it should change the colors and make it obvious that that's where you are.
So essentially, how much are we actually going to need to program, and how much are we going to need to just input things into a site and let it do it for us?
Yeah. So this stuff. So let me show you. So for example, this is the code that would make
that
things.
Needs to be written by someone, right?
Yeah, so this code has to be written by someone, but it is making it a lot nicer than like the forms that we've created so far, right? So you're just saying, hey, I want to use my example for with class. They put in the placeholder, they wrap the form field and this mat form field, which is just making it nice, and then you're ready to go. So you don't have to go write all the CSS and the JavaScript to create the animations, to get the color changes, that type of thing.
Okay.
They also, generally speaking, will allow for a way for you to do theming by setting some variables. So you can say like what your primary color is, your secondary color, your tertiary color, and your elements will inherit that.
Great. Not to interrupt.
Yeah.
Can you click to the CSS tab and just so I can see? Like,
Yeah. So all they're doing here is saying I have an example form. I just want it to take up so much width, but it's not actually part of the general elements that you would normally be using.
Great.
So,
cool.
Yeah. So the CSS for these components is written in a completely different place. You're just bringing it in to make your stuff look nice.
Okay.
All right. And then I think, did you guys actually receive the email about taking the survey?
I did. We did.
If you can go try to find it and fill it out if you haven't. And then this isn't a particularly pretty site by any means, but just to show you quickly, so I'm using a framework to do this, and I wrote 0 lines of CSS for this, and you get these buttons in a group and colored, and you get your fonts, and you get the header, you get a search bar that has a little search icon in it, you get this little avatar thing set up where you can have multiple avatars, you get a card set up. So like all of that stuff just happens without CSS. You just put some attributes or classes on your thing and it just happens. Same thing with like the positioning, so the layout is all done with a predefined grid and all that. I was going to show you a prettier thing, but the prettier things do have some CSS. So, all right. So was everybody able to find that survey and fill it out? Yeah, I'll give you guys a few minutes to do that.
Your name popped up.
No? Dang, Jen. Having trouble, man. So actually, if I remember correctly, it asks you to input your name. Like I think the link is just a link, right? Would you guys mind posting it in Slack so if others don't have it?
Right. Yeah, I can. Anyone?
You can just put it in the in our class channel.
Thank you.
So Sam, I
Yep.
printed out this Git cheat sheet,
Uh-huh.
and I don't see Git add on
Okay.
it. I'm trying to, sorry, I got wet in the rain.
Yeah.
So I see, so Git initiate, right?
Yeah, so
Git
then
code.
this guy.
Oh, Git add, so, okay.
Yep.
And Git commit.
Yeah, so Git stat, these are all like giving you information. Git status we use quite a bit. Git log will show you a log of all of the
Right.
last few commits.
Right.
Git diff will show you the difference between what you're currently doing
Okay.
and what is the last committed.
Okay.
You can also do Git diff
Yes.
and name of branch, and it'll show you the difference between your branches.
Which is Git branch over here.
So Git branch will show you all the branches that exist
Mhm.
currently in your directory,
Mhm.
and will highlight the one you're on.
Okay.
Git checkout B branch will create a new branch and move you onto that branch.
Okay.
Basically, it will copy whatever branch you're on, name it new things you can start playing. Git merge branch will take any changes from the branch that you name and it will merge them into whatever branch you're working with.
Okay. Cool, so I can also post this on.
Yeah, that'd be
This
great.
is good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So any chance you could add me to the Slack channel again?
Yeah. What's your? Do you know your Slack? Oh, it's invite and then hold. Do any of these look like? There, this is you, right?
In my other Slack channels, I've got a image.
Okay. If you click on this, what shows up on the? Probably if you get a profile and account.
Changing over the Chrome, logged in and everything with Safari. But
I see. Yeah.
yeah, that is me. Something my WeWork email. Right.
Which is what?
Josh got, I'll be in there already, so I mustn't have fallen out. It must be just a.
Oh, the login is a
reset,
different.
so-
I see.
Yeah, let me try another way.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't get to that email, so.
That's how they get you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happened to me too because they gave out Flatiron School emails to begin with, and then they decided to go with personal emails instead, and so I can't get to the email that all of my stuff is set up.
Gotcha. Are you able to add people to that channel?
I think so.
So I'm Josh Cross Daniel. Dot Daniel.
Is this-
that one, yeah.
This okay. I can not. I think there is something about you have to use the same email because when we go to learn.co and you associate your Slack email, which is the same one that's associated with your GitHub email, I think that's what gives you access to this LearnCo workspace.
I changed my email address on learn.co.
But I think because you didn't then go and reauthorize Slack, and I don't even know if you can at that point. You could try. You could go back to the accounts and click on the authorize Slack again, or you might not even have that option anymore. Let me see. So like in
I can.
so if you go to your manage account, I think.
Yeah, and you go connected apps.
Yeah.
Slack doesn't give you a chance.
It's not even there. Yep.
Other tops.
This one. Okay. So, but there's no way to disconnect it.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. This is probably like you probably need to ask Erin
Yeah.
if she can get somebody to disconnect you and reconnect you.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Actually, I think make it away.
So is anyone else
Nice.
like
Nice.
creating websites on Atom with CSS?
Say that one more time.
I was just asking if anyone else is creating websites with Atom, just for the fun of it.
Oh, just in the classroom.
Not
I
yet.
haven't thought about it yet.
I'm trying.
You have something?
It's super basic.
Do you want to show it?
No.
We're going to start our class projects next week, so it's a good head start, but maybe that's the thing you can use for that.
Yeah. My main question is how do you So when you're on a website, I know you have the nav bar, right?
Yep.
So how do you create an extra page within the HTML?
So like you want to take them to somewhere else is what you're saying.
Within the page.
Yeah.
Or
So
within the-
yeah. So if you, we can do that as an example. I'll do that as an example. Is everybody done with the survey? Okay. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll do that as part of the example. All right, so what we want to do again, we're going to start up our terminal. We're going to do a little bit of git exercise. We're going to create a new branch. We are going to go over some JavaScript so that we can start to familiarize ourselves with that a little bit more. And then we'll get into the actual lesson today, which is just going over some CSS elements. We'll go over the box model and what that means. We'll do block versus inline. We'll talk a little bit about float. We'll talk about positioning and z-index. So
where should we be in our terminal?
So for you guys, it's at, you want to cd to tilde, which is, what does tilde mean again? Remember? It's your home directory. So in my case, if you look in the Finder, it's the thing that has a home next to it. So it's Samuel Birk.
Sure.
And then you're going to go into, you guys have a directory called code. And then inside of there, you have a directory called learning-get2. And you'll cd to there. I actually have mine in a slightly different place, so that doesn't quite work for me. CD.
Is it under code?
Should be, yeah. So it should be cd tilde / code / learning-get, and then if you type pwd in there, we can print our working directory and we can see we're in my case, user /sim Birk /flatiron-dc /learning-get2, but yours will say something like user / your username / code / learning-get2.
Alright, we need a little help get there.
Yep. So first thing to do is type pwd usually so we can find out where we are. So you are in your user directory, so you're already in there tilde. So then you can type ls. And yeah, that's a list, and you can see the code directory. So you can just cd space code. You can tab. Tab will autocomplete, so it says okay, there's a code directory. You can tab again. Tab twice. It'll tell you what's inside of that directory. So learning-get, so you can type L and then tab. It'll shortcut you to something. So now so if you type pwd now, yeah, and it'll tell you, yeah, your user's code learning, and if you type ls, you'll see on files. Okay, so then once we're here, we're going to start by just typing git status, which does what again?
Where you are.
Yeah, it shows you where you are in terms of what branch you're on. It also tells you if you have anything that needs to be committed. I don't think you're probably in this state. So if it doesn't say on branch master, your branch is up to date with origin master, what does it say?
Modified index.js file.
Okay. All right. Does it say that you're on a branch that's like Josh dash something?
On master.
You're on master. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I was on the CSS fundamentals.
Okay. Shaw, you're in.
It says no changes added to the minute.
I already pushed already.
Shaw's there too.
That's okay.
Dash get to.
You're on. Okay. Does it say you're on branch master?
No.
Okay. So if you're on branch master and you have things that are modified, then do git checkout -b and then some branch name. You can name it whatever you want. So it could be like Josh-trash or.
So we all create a new one right
No, because if you're not on master, you're fine. Okay. So once you're not on master, then we're going to add, commit, and push our code so that it's up on the cloud so we don't lose anything. So remember how to do that.
Git commit -m message.
So you do that, but what do you have to do before that?
Git add space period.
Yeah, it's git add space period and then git commit dash m with a message in quotes.
So everyone's doing this.
Yep. And then how do we actually get our code onto GitLab?
Get
Git
push
push
origin
origin.
branch.
Git push origin branch. That's right.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so once we're in that state, then we should be able to say git status, and it should say we're on branch master, your branch is up to date with origin master. Oh, sorry, you're on your branch is up to date with your branch name. Nothing to commit, working tree clean. So everybody see something like that? So,
No.
so it won't say.
Go to section.
Okay, so just as you got into that state, you can see sometimes we get out of that case. Just you're on CSS branch fundamental, so that's all good. So just do git add dot space dot and then git commit. So press up. T space dash M space dash M. And then press up in quotes. So space and then in quotes, just put some message. Enter and then git push origin CSS dash 1. Dash 1. So this would be CSS dash 1. Okay. So once you're in that state, then you can do git checkout master. So git space checkout space master. And then just to make sure that we're up to date with everything that's currently on master on GitLab, how do we get up to date with what's on GitLab?
Git status.
So what does git status do?
So tell you where you are and tell you if you have anything to commit.
Yeah, git status tells you where you are and tells you what you need to commit. So if we want to, like, let's say that I pushed some things up to master last night.
Oh, you want to pull it back.
Yeah, that's right. So
Git
we
origin pull master.
close. Yeah, git pull
Git
or
pull.
origin master. Yep. So git space pull space origin space master.
Git status will tell you if there's anything.
It won't.
Oh, really?
No, git status only knows about the state of your local computer. It doesn't know about things that exist outside of there. If you've pulled recently, it'll tell you, like, let's say you're on a branch and you do git fetch, which will pull down all of your branches for you. It'll tell you that your branch is ahead of master by so many commits, but only because you've locally come to know that piece of information.
So
Yep.
in the past, I didn't see, when you were doing origin master,
Yep.
I didn't see that slash. Is that required?
No, so you do, the command is git pull origin master, like that.
Okay.
This origin slash master is referencing the branch master that exists on GitLab, is really what that's saying, which locally becomes just master for you.
Okay, so you said there were three things that git status shows you. It shows you where you are.
Shows you where you are, if you have anything that needs to be committed, and what branch you're on.
So where you are in your local drive.
Yeah. So it'll show you, yeah. So basically, it tells you what branch you're on. It tells you if you have anything that's been modified recently that needs to be committed. That's pretty much it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, so it's really two
This is
things. I
so
guess.
difficult, like, this HTML and CSS is like butter.
Yeah.
This shit is like.
Yeah, the Git stuff takes a little while to get used to. It really does. The big things, though, remember, like, what we want to focus on is remembering a set of commands. So if I want to persist my changes to GitLab, I do git add dot git commit m, so message, and I git push origin my branch name. If I want to get the latest things from the GitLab, I want to git checkout master after I've committed things. Git checkout master, git pull origin master. If I want to create a new branch to start playing with, I want to be on master, and then I want to do git checkout -b, some branch name. And then I want to go back to this process. So really it goes.
So the left side is local, right? And the right side is going to be pushing into.
So this is pushing actually. So generally speaking, you probably start here. You're on your master branch. You want to start playing with new stuff. So you git checkout B, some branch name. You come over here. You make your changes to your code. You're all good. You add it and commit it and push it up to GitLab, and then you want to like get back to master so you can start some new thing. So you git checkout master, git pull origin master, your new stuff, and then you git checkout the branch, and then you. It's just this over and over and over. And over.
I'm gonna take a picture of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not. It's got all kinds of other crap on the wall too, but.
Fine. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So once we're here, we're on master. We're going to do git checkout -b, and then your name dash, and then let's just say simple list. And then we're going to go ahead and open up Atom. So the way I like to do this is just go to your directory you're learning Git to in your Finder, and then you can just drag it down onto Atom. And it should just open right up for you.
Simple list has to be one word.
You can't put spaces in a branch name. So you can put dashes or underscores or something like that. Okay, so if I pull that down on the Atom, then I can see my files here. This is just our very basic project. If you remember from last week, there's not much going on, but we have an index.html that has our basic HTML structure. We are including a style sheet, which is index.cs, which right now just has a single class that colors things red, and then our index.js, which has a single thing, which is console log hello. Cool. And then we can go ahead and open up index.html in our browser. So you can do that by going into your Finder and just double clicking on index.html, and it'll open it up in your browser. If you inspect, so you can right click and then click on inspect, or command option I will also do this. You'll see that we're console logging hello. There's nothing else going on. I got that?
Okay, so it was supposed to be done.
It's not blank. It looks like that.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just basic document structure.
So you're doing git checkout, right?
Yeah.
So,
Check out.
Space.
say that again?
Space.
Space.
Yeah, so if you don't
Dash. Simple list. Simple dash list.
Space between them?
No, that's a dash.
So and then if you inspect,
You're in a dash. Simple dash.
Awesome.
Inspect.
click on console. So, and that's just coming from our JavaScript file.
So let's switch to that branch.
Then I made a CSS file in it's okay.
Yeah, it's all fine. It doesn't affect. It won't affect this because we're on our brand new clean branch, and our index.css should just be this. The only thing that's going to affect our web page is the CSS file that is linked in our index.html, and right now that is this index.css, which is at the same directory level. So it's href.
So in the future, should I create a new file? Like, because I've been,
you just want to create a new branch. So if you,
so for the purpose of the class,
yeah,
and what we're learning, I've been messing with this.
yeah, that's fine. Just make sure you're on your own branch. So in your case, it was you were playing on CSS-fundamentals, so you just need to check out CSS-fundamentals to go back to that branch. Like if you open up your index.css file right now, it should look like this. Like it should look like that. If it doesn't, yeah, okay.
Yeah, but when we switched branches, it should have gotten you back to the so. Okay. So if you go back, go to your terminal. See what works.
So I think I just probably do like a different index.
Yeah, so it's just. So we'll just make it so that playground bridge. Okay. Might be a bad state, which is just so you just have to close it. Let's see. Go back to that. Let's see. No, I think actually all was probably just that you had Adam open while you were doing the switching.
Okay.
And Adam doesn't seem to do a very good job of actually switching the file content out. So you probably just had to close all the windows and reopen them.
Sure.
Okay, so we should be in this state. We should have our very clean HTML file, CSS file, JavaScript file. We're going to walk through, again, some JavaScript examples. So let's start by talking about variables. So what are variables? What are they good for? Why do we use them?
It's used to substitute for an assigned value
Yep.
wherever the variable occurs.
Yep, it's used for substitution, right? It's about aliasing. So what's so
If I say something like, number equals 22, and then I say new number equals 4, and then I say number times, which you do in JavaScript with an asterisk, new number. What's the result?
And yet,
And how do we get there?
takes the value that's been assigned to each of those variables and multiplies it.
Yeah, so the way to think about it is, okay, number has been assigned to 22, so I can replace any instance of number with 22. And new number has been assigned to 4, so it can replace any instance of new number 4. So this ends up being 22 times.
So what does that do? Like in JavaScript, what essentially does that?
It literally just outputs HTML.
Yeah, right.
It does nothing interesting at all. But the point is that
Right.
you can take these variables and you can use them then later and use them over and over again. We'll get to the more useful aspects of this when we get to functions and parameters, but so that's what variables are. So another example of this that we did last time is we said, if I say that I have a car and the car is going to be Ford Mustang, and then I have a owned by, and that's equal to John. If I then create a string, so this is called concatenation, we talked about this a little bit last time. So if I have a string that says the plus car plus is owned by plus, sorry, owned by, over here, I'll write it right here, but what does that output?
It would give you the two variables in place of those. So say the car's owned by whoever.
Yeah, so explicitly what would it say? Like read the sentence as though the variables have been substituted.
The Ford Mustang is owned by John.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought, for the sake of JavaScript,
Yep.
if you're using the string for the quote, you would then have to use a single brackets for the car because it can't take both. So if you use single for the variables, you have to then use the double quotes for. But you had to go, and this is, I just thought I read this earlier, that's why I'm asking.
I think what you were probably reading about, and this is where last class started to get confused, is interpolation, where they're doing something that's more like this with the braces.
Okay.
And what's happening there is instead of doing concatenation this way, in the S6 there's a shorthand where you can do something like this.
Okay.
So you don't have to do the pluses, you can just do this as interpolation.
Okay.
That's probably what you're talking about, I'm not 100% sure. But
Or if you want quote max within the string.
what's that?
If you want quote max within the string.
Yeah, so if you wanted to do this, so that it would say the car
Okay, yeah.
is owned by, then you have to put, you single quotes around the
So
car.
you could use double again.
You can use a double, but to use a double, so what it's looking for in JavaScript is it says start of the string, end of the string.
And that's what I think I was,
Right.
when he said,
And
I think
so-
that's what I was saying.
So to get past that, you can put a backslash in front of it, and then it'll come out as the car.
Gotcha.
So I can Google it easily.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've grasped HTML and CSS pretty well so
Yeah.
far.
Yeah.
Can you explain to me what JavaScript is doing, like conceptually? Like,
Why? So why does it matter,
Yeah.
or what? Is
like
that-
just in general, like when you look at a website,
Yeah.
what is JavaScript?
Do on the
What does
website?
it layer onto
Yeah.
the CSS and the HTML?
So everything that's interesting. So if you were just trying to create a Web 1.0 website where it is, I know exactly what my content is. I want to put an image. I want to have some content that I'm going to update every day, and that's all you're doing. You don't need JavaScript at all. Like you can just put content out there. You can style it nice. It'll look great. It'll have your images. If you want to do anything dynamic whatsoever, so let's say I want it so that I every 30 seconds swap out what this image is, so that it's doing like a carousel, or I want that when they click on the save button, it sends without reloading the entire page, it sends a payload up that gets persisted,
Okay.
or I want to make it so that when they click on this button, it scrolls them down on the page to a specific place so they see some new information, or I want to allow people to be able to drag a card onto another card, and that's going to say that like they're putting it into their basket, or I want to load a piece of content dynamically in when they say that they're going to, like maybe I want to swap all of my language out when they say that they're speaking French.
Sure.
Right? Any of those things, anything that's dynamic is done through JavaScript.
So in terms of hierarchy, you've got HTML, then CSS like applies, right, the
Yeah.
dynamic to HTML. Does JavaScript trump all of that? Like how does it?
It's different. So
Okay.
it's working as, so JavaScript can apply HTML and CSS to any element on your page. It
Okay.
can also add elements into your page. It can also be used not to touch your page at all, but potentially to access external APIs and pull information down or put information up. JavaScript also can be used completely outside of the context of a website. Like you can write JavaScript just for the purpose of, hey, I know that I need to send an email out to 1,000 people, and that email I want to be exactly the same, except I want to swap out their names. And so I have a list of names, and so I don't want to have to write that on my own 1,000 times when all I'm doing is swapping the name out. I can use JavaScript to just loop over the list of names and send out each email one at a time.
Okay.
Right? So you can totally use it without the website itself.
Sam, I think because you know so much,
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard for you to try to lane it up.
Yeah.
Because I would say this, like, for the way you introduced JavaScript to us last week,
Yeah.
it was kind of like, what the hell is this?
Oh yeah.
But it's like, what he's asking pretty much, it seems like it's like, he wants to see like where JavaScript falls in this hierarchy of HTML, CSS, and you're pretty much trying to say, it's not anywhere, it's an entity of its own, but it behaves with them. So it's like, pretty much JavaScript is just the behavior of the HTML and CSS. While HTML is content, CSS is styling, to put some behavior behind these things to execute some
That's
things.
right. That's right.
JavaScript.
If you want any sort of behavior, if you want any events to happen, if you want any changes to happen, then you need JavaScript to make.
And I haven't gotten to the lesson so far, but so do you have to link that in the HTML?
Yeah,
Like
so
you do
the-
with CSS, or
so-
what do you do with- yeah.
So the link is just the script tag.
Okay.
So inside of here,
Mhm.
right, we have script source index.js.
Right.
That's saying load all the JavaScript that's inside of this file
Okay.
and then start using it. In our case, we haven't been talking yet about how JavaScript can change your website. I'm trying to like bring it in slowly because that's the whole thing. Like last time, we didn't get to this stuff until, I mean, you don't actually start doing this until like week 5, I think, in the schedule. And the problem is that by the time that you get there, there's just not enough runway left for all of the concepts to sink in. And they also jump straight into how do we use it on the website. What I'm trying to do is just talk about, because these concepts are hard in and of themselves. What are variables? What are loops? What are functions? What are conditionals? If we can come to understand what those things are outside of the context of what they can do with the website, when we get to the website manipulation, it should be a lot easier to understand what's going on.
Okay.
So that's the point.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you guys seen this earlier.
Yeah. It takes a while to start for this stuff to sink in.
Sorry if I'm asking.
No.
questions.
Yeah.
No.
All right, so that's variables. Variables are about substitution. We can use them to change out data. All right, the next thing I'm going to ask you is what are functions and what are their purpose?
Question before we get into that.
Yeah.
Variables. Can we identify variables in our code and put a value to them all in the same line?
What do you mean by that?
So when you're writing code, isn't it proper to like identify your variables? So before you say, tell the computer to add X plus Y,
Yeah.
you have to first say there is a variable that we're calling X, correct?
Yeah, if you don't declare a variable, it's not even, so in JavaScript, the best practice is to do something that looks like,
Before you even start getting into your function stuff. Just kind of declare everything.
where you are explicitly declaring that X is going to be a variable,
Right.
and then you're saying, and I want to set X equal to 10 at this point,
Okay.
and then you're multiplying it by 10. Now, most of the time in JavaScript, the way this actually plays out is the first time that you define your variable, you just do all of that.
Yeah, that's what I was asking. So we can define it and put a value to it at
Yeah.
the same time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've seen some code where it says variable X, great, X equals 10.
Yeah. So that's just, I mean, I think that became a best practice, and I'm trying to remember what the reasoning behind that was. But most code nowadays actually compiles down into that for you anyway. You end up writing it just as like this, and it'll turn it into that declaration, the two-step declaration process when it actually goes into your website. But yeah, this is totally fine. In fact, I haven't even been talking about this let piece or this var piece, and I don't want to yet because again, it's a confusing thing, and it's not a necessary thing. It is useful for getting some errors to help you to not do bad things. 90% of the time, especially the code that you're writing, it's never going to affect you. And so let's just ignore it for the moment and just do it this way. It's the simpler way. We're just going to declare variables by saying x equals 10. Yep. So if we did something like this, what is going to happen in our browser?
Log 100.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's going to log out 100, which is what we see happen right here. Okay. Other questions about variables? Okay. All right, so the next thing is functions. So what are functions?
script that performs operations.
It's a script that performs operations. Technically, though, like I can write as much code as I want to in this file, and it'll do all the operations that are in the file. So why do we have functions? Like, what's the point of them?
I guess you can control the timing for when it operates.
Yes.
So you can decide when to call it.
Yep. Yeah, so that's a big part of it is you get to control when you're actually going to call these things. It gives you a lot more control over that piece of the code.
Is it any name you make up or are functions already predefined in the language?
So functions, as we're talking about them at the moment, is anything that you want to make up. There are functions that are available to you through JavaScript.
That are like universal.
That are like universal. Those are usually prototype functions, they're called, which is to say, instead of, generally speaking, in JavaScript, you're not going to say something like toString and then pass it a number. JavaScript usually has functions that run this way. So you will say the name of the thing and then you'll call a function off of it.
So for me to further like conceptualize in my head,
Yep.
can you go to a website and show me what JavaScript does? Like,
Yeah, so
like what is the difference between CSS and I'm still having a hard time.
So for example, right, if I switch from this Slack tab to this Twitter tab, actually, that's maybe not the best example.
Go to what might, so
Hold on.
I love go to thieverycorporation.com. They're from DC for a reason. Okay, so
that could totally be CSS. This is a video that's playing in the background, which you saw how to do the video tabs. That's probably all fine.
Yep.
This animation that's happening right here, that's probably all CSS.
Okay.
This animation that's happening, probably all CSS.
Okay.
They might not have any.
So
Yes,
a function
sorry.
JavaScript would be like if you had a form and you were inputting information.
Yep.
And send it to a database. Like JavaScript.
So here's one. No.
Like Google.
So if I click continue, you saw for a moment the continue button went from continue to signing in. That swapping of content right there that's happening, that's JavaScript. It says when I click on the button, I want you to change the word to say saving until I get a response back from the server. That's really what it said. So if it came back with an error, it would have changed to sign to continue again, so I could click the button.
So JavaScript is not interactive.
What do you mean by that, I guess?
Like as a user. Like,
Yep. So as a user, your interactions, typically speaking, are causing some JavaScript event to fire,
Right.
which causes something else to happen on the website.
Okay.
So for example, if I click on this button here, all of this stuff that just loaded, it all just loaded because of JavaScript.
Okay.
Or if I click here, the CSS class that was applied to make this gray was done with JavaScript. Also, you see how this message is changing, the preview that's showing up is changing? That's because of JavaScript. Like the content is changing because JavaScript is saying, okay, I want to preview the message for this card.
Okay.
Right. If I click on this duplicate button, it will duplicate, it's somewhere down here probably, but it duplicates that message by going out to the server, creating a duplicate of it, persisting it, and then showing the duplicate card, like this one, on the page. So JavaScript is doing all of those things. JavaScript is also responsible in this case for, you see this tooltip that's showing up as I scroll over things, it's making that show up. It's also responsible for, if I type in message, it's filtering all these cards for the word message existing somewhere, and all of that is happening through JavaScript.
So anything that is dynamically changing the content or dynamically changing the classes, which is to say dynamically changing the style of the page, that is happening through JavaScript.
Okay, got it.
So it's all about the dynamic. It's like things that are changing on the fly without reloading the page.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. That makes sense.
But also, beyond these interactions, JavaScript is a programming language, which is to say you can use it for basically anything in which you want to. I mean, the biggest things are you understand how the job should be done, and it's something that you want to do over and over and over and over again. Right? So if you have a process in your life that you get annoyed by because you have to do it over and over and over again, and you want it to just be automated, JavaScript can do that. Right? So for example, you can create JavaScript to log into your bank account and pay your bills for the month every month from your computer without having to interact with the website. So it can do anything that is repetitive. It can do anything that a computer can do, basically. But in the case of websites, the primary usage are those that we've gone over here.
Right.
Cool?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. All right, so back to functions. So functions are, it's very nice to be able to group code and be able to determine when you should call them, as opposed to just having it happen because we reload the page. So that's a big part of it. The other primary reason for functions is about grouping code, which goes along with that. But it's a way for us to organize our code in a way that we can reuse that code over and over again. So if I wanted to create a function, how do I do that? Type function, and then
Name of the function.
Name of the function. Brackets, curly braces, and we have a function. Okay, so for right now I'm just going to say console.log in the function. So if I go back and I refresh our page, what's going to happen?
Nothing.
Nothing. Why nothing?
We haven't called the function.
We haven't actually called the function. So if I go back here, you can see there's nothing, nothing's logged, nothing's on our page. So how do I actually make it say in the function?
Right, and name of the function and brackets.
Yep. So now we actually see it in the function. Okay.
So you just call it just by writing it? That's it?
You just call it by writing it and opening and closing the parentheses.
Let me go back to that.
Yep. So we wrote that function. We can create another function, my car, and that's going to console.log. I do not have one. And then we can have another function that's called your car. It could be Honda Civic.
So what would, well, I'll let you go ahead.
Nope, go ahead.
What would typically go in the brackets, if anything, ever? In the
parentheses? So in the parentheses, and we'll get to an example of that in just a second, but in the parentheses you can put, they're called parameters. They're really variables that you can swap out so that you can reuse the same code over and over again.
We did that last time with the car example.
That's right, that's right. So we'll do that briefly again today as a refresher. Okay, so now if I refresh the page, what's going to happen?
Just that first function will get called.
Just that first function will get called, yep. So it just says in the function. So now to Josh's point about calling things when we want to. If we look at this code and we read it linearly, which is how computers generally read code, which is top to bottom in the file, we would expect that we would see in the function, I do not have one Honda Civic, right? And we could make that happen if we called these functions in order. Okay, so in this case, we get things to happen in that order. But what if I change the order? What if I call the your car function first? Now what are we going to see?
Honda Civic. And then the next two.
Yeah, Honda Civic, and then in the function, and then I do not have one because the order in which we call these things matters. The other advantage is that you can call functions inside of other functions. So I could, for example, in the name of your function, call the your car function, and then the my car function. And now if I call name of the function, what's going to happen in our console?
Prints all three.
It's going to print all three. In what order?
In the function on the Civic. I don't know.
That's right. Okay. So that doesn't seem all that useful quite yet, but we're going to start to build up a car here in just a moment, and we'll start to see why this actually matters. Any questions about where we are right now?
No, can you paste it on Slack real quick?
Yeah. Yep.
Slow typing.
All right. So let's try to build up a car. So what are some of the pieces of a car?
An engine.
An engine. So let's have an engine function. What are some other things?
Body.
Body. Okay. What are some of the pieces of a body of a car?
Doors.
Okay, we can start with that. Let's keep it simple for a moment. Okay. All right, so let's say that we want to be able to build up a car, and we want to be able to swap out what the engine is, swap out what the body is, swap out what the doors are that are on the body, right? There's a couple of ways that we can do this. The easiest way to get started is by passing in parameters. So let's, for engine, for example, start by putting in a parameter that's called type. And I'm going to say if the type is A, then I want it to be a 500 horsepower engine. And if the type is B, then I want it to be a 1,000 horsepower engine. It's a serious machine. Okay? How would we make that happen here? So if I call engine with type A, I want to return a 500 horsepower engine. If I put type B, then I want to return a 1,000 horsepower engine.
If type equals A, then you want to, are you looking to return?
Yeah, we can return, sure. So let's just return a string of 500 horsepower. Otherwise, if I type B, how do I do that?
Else.
Else, yep. Then I'm going to return 1,000 horsepower. Log out engine of type A. What are we going to see in our console?
500 horsepower, hopefully.
500 horsepower, hopefully. That's right. That's how coding works. Yep. That's all hope.
So you couldn't put just engine by itself.
Say that one more time. So you couldn't just
Oh,
you couldn't put engine without A in it, you mean?
without console.
So without console.log, so what this is doing is saying, okay, engine A, and at this point in the code, 500 horsepower will exist as a string. But that's not particularly useful for us to be able to see. So one thing that you could do here instead of console logging it is you could say my engine equals engine A. At which point, even without console logging it, my engine is 500 horsepower. But because we're not using it for anything else, all we can really do is console log it out to see it.
We could have also not had console log within the function.
You could have just console logged instead of return. That's right. So you could have done console log here instead of return.
What did you say type is called?
Parameter.
Type is called a parameter, which then gets used as a variable within our function. Okay. And then for body, let's say that we're going to have a standard, a sport, and a super sport. Okay. Those again are going to be based on, let's make them X, Y, and Z. Okay, so if I put in the type for the body of X, I want to have a standard. If I put in Y, I want a sport. And if I put in Z, I want a super sport. Okay. So let's say, again, we're going to have a body of a type. So how do I get standard, sport, and super sport?
You could go with the if statement again.
Yep.
So if type is equal to X.
Okay.
And then else if.
Else if.
Type is equal to what? Turn sport. Else.
Turns super sport.
How come else if turns up blue here?
I think I messed up. That's because it's supposed to. Yeah.
Alright.
Okay. So now if I console.log body Y, what are we going to see in the console? Sport. I do. Okay. Now I want to go a little bit further though with our conditionals. So if the engine for my car is a 500 horsepower, then the only body type that is available is standard. Okay, so we're going to take this a little bit further and start to see like how this can actually be useful. So what we're going to do first is we're going to build an object for our car. Okay. You guys remember what an object was from last class? What are objects?
It's like a variable that you can have other variables attached to it.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, so it's like it's a way of creating a variable that has attributes, multiple attributes. Okay, so like for example, we could say that we're going to create a car, and it's going to have an engine, and right now we'll just make the engine null, and it's going to have a body. We'll also make it null, and it's going to have a set of door. Well, actually, and then body will have its own object nested inside of it, which is going to have doors, which for the moment we're going to set as null. Okay, this body, see what's happening here is we're getting essentially a hierarchy. So our car has a body attribute, and it has an engine attribute, and the body has a doors attribute. So bodies have doors, cars have bodies and engines. So we're going to create our car like this, and we're actually going to start by giving the car an engine. And for our standard car, let's just say our first car, we're going to make the engine 500, sorry, we're going to use engine type A. Okay. So now, when I go to add my body in, I want to take into consideration what my engine is for my car. So I'm going to take both a type and a car. Okay. So we're going to pass our car in along with a type, and it's going to tell us if it's able, it's going to give us back a body type. So we can say Y, but if our car has a 500 horsepower engine, it doesn't matter. We're still going to get back standard, because you can't have a sport or a super sport if you only have a 500 horsepower engine. Okay, so it doesn't matter what type that we choose, we're going to get back standard no matter what. So if I were to do that, so in this case I'm going to say console.log body, and the car is going to be first car, and the type is going to be, let's say Y. What's going to happen as what's going to what's going to be the output of this as our code currently exists?
Sport.
So it's still going to come out with sport. And the reason is that we're not actually using the car parameter for anything currently. So what we're really trying to do now is say if the type is X or the car has an engine of 500 horsepower, then I want to be standard. Else, if the type is Y, I want it to be sport, and otherwise I want it to be super sport. So how do we make that happen?
You change that first if statement and function you're in, put in 2 pipes.
Yep,
Or,
which means or.
and then we want car square bracket engine is equal to 500 horsepower.
Okay, so now we get back standard. And so the interesting thing here is that we're starting to build up our car with some logic sets, and we're able to take our variable that we're defining down here, and we're able to use that in determining what we're going to output for each one of these. This is where the power of code starts to come in, because now you can start to do pretty complex decision-making trees on what you want your car to end up looking like by passing in variables and understanding what your car actually is. So this is like a super advanced example of things, it really is, but I wanted to be able to show you that like you can start to do advanced things with code. It goes beyond the simple, you know, you can create a variable and those variables multiply.
Can you do that to slide as well, please?
Yeah. So then, just to take this a little bit further, instead of passing in the car and the type all the time like we're doing here currently, another way to do it is that we are just going to pass in our car and we're going to return back a car. So in that case, we could do something like if the car's engine is 500 horsepower, then what we want to do is make the car have a body equal to standard, and then we're going to return car. Otherwise, let's say we're going to return super sport as the body. And we're still going to return car. And in fact, it's a little bit cleaner. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're saying the body, we're going to figure out what body it is based on the engine that the car has. We're going to change the body based on whatever body we should be giving it. And then we are going to return the car that now should have both a body and an engine. Okay, so in our case, we're going to pass in body first car, and what we're going to get back is not just the body, but we're going to get the entire car back. So if we refresh, you see now we have the full car that has both the engine and the body. Because what we're doing here is we're passing in the car, but we're also returning the car. We're returning the car after we've changed what its body attribute is. So we could go further even and say car.body.type is going to be super sport or standard. and its doors are going to be 4 2. And then we might not even call this body anymore. We might just call this build. So we're just going to build our car. Okay. So we have an engine. We create our first car. That car has an engine associated with it. And then we are going to build our first car, which is to say we're going to add a body to it. And that body is going to have type and doors. And if we refresh, we get a type not defined.
So you've got all this going on in the inspect tool.
Yep.
Can you show me how it links to HTML?
Yes.
Is that too much?
It's just a little hard to get to. Yeah, we can look at it. Give me 1 sec.
Just needs the body
Type. It's because car doesn't have a body when I'm passing it in. So if I do that, or
It was kind of very visual there, so I just like to see.
yeah. So just so we can see, so here's the car and the body and the engine and these pieces. Okay, so now, if I want to use this to now display in the HTML, like what the car body is, you could do something like, let's see, do we have anything in here? Probably something. Yeah, so let's go back to our index.html, and we are just going to create a div. And the ID is going to be car engine, and then we'll have car body, and then car doors. And what you can do is say our final car is the car after it's been built, and then we want to say document.get element by ID car body. That will take a function in as the second parameter. So we're just going to create a new function called set car body. Actually, we can just do it this way without the callback. So we'll just say, let's just remove these. So get element by ID car body dot inner text equals final car dot body dot type. What do I name these things? Car body. Sure. And then we can duplicate that and do car engine, and it's going to be the final car engine, and then we can duplicate that and do the car doors. It's just going to be body.doors. Assuming I haven't messed anything up, which of course I probably have. Text document.get element by ID. Unexpected token, line 23. Text null car body. By ID car body. That should be fine. Yeah, so we'll take a break. I'll go look and see what the debugging is that I'm missing.
In the
But
HTML, you haven't actually written anything.
you haven't actually written anything, but what's going to happen is we're going to replace what's inside of this div with our car engine. We're going to replace what's inside of this div with our car body, and we're going to replace what's inside of this div with our car doors. And then there's a event listener, so you could say, and when I select a different car, then change what that text says, right? And that's what JavaScript is able to do. It swaps that content in and out.
I was just shopping for a car, so.
Yeah, so that makes sense. It's useful. Yeah. Yeah, so that's basically it. It's about being able to, like, while you're on the screen, choosing the engine that you want and having that swap out what the car looks like in the previewer. I'm not sure why that didn't just work, but okay. So we've done everything except for loops today. We'll review those again next time, but we'll say that that's our Git, JavaScript intro for today. We'll take a break for 10 minutes, and when we come back, we'll get into CSS again. Cool.
How do you know what you want to call your functions, like when you decide it's going to be first, like does it matter when you say first class?
It doesn't matter. It's just so there's usefulness in being careful about what you're naming things from. I work on a team, and I want other people to know how to read this, and it should be obvious to them what this is doing. But there's no restrictions from like code. You're defining the code. You can name it whatever you want.
And we will do functions in the next class again too.
Oh yeah, in every class from this point forward. Yeah, it's one of those. All of these pieces of programming you just have to do them over and over and over again. Eventually it starts to click, and when it does, then all kinds of opportunities open up. But until you get there, it's just hard stuff. I don't know. It's just this abstraction of the world that we don't do on a daily basis. Like even variables, right? Most of the time when we're in the world, like a chair is a chair is a chair. We don't think about the chair as being something that we can swap out for something else, right? It is kind of like if you have an architectural layout and you have like a table that's drawn and you think about, oh, I realize I can change that table with anything of about that size. So it could be my grandma's coffee table, or it could be the dining table that I saw at IKEA, or it could be something from you know, a furniture store that I was at recently. And so, like, maybe that's where that translation can happen. But that doesn't become, that's just one piece of it. Then being able to decide, like, how can I make it so that I can easily rotate through a list of tables and have those pop up in there instead, that's where functions and loops start to become useful. So that, like, if you were on a website and you're trying to change out the furniture in a room and you want to, like, swipe to the side to see what the next one looks like, that is a looped list of all of the options that you have available to put into that variable position, and then you're changing the variable over and over again, which is basically that you're probably calling the function over and over again with now the new piece of furniture.
Was the problem just that the JS file wasn't linked in?
Almost. So the JS file was linked in, which is how the console.log stuff was working. It's that the way that JavaScript works, and there are these things called closures that you can use that makes this less of an issue, but it's reading from the browser is reading from the top of the file to the bottom. So if you look at index.html, for example, I had my script tag up here, right? And so the way to read it would be, okay, I see HTML, I see head, I see some CSS file, let me load that in. Okay, I see JavaScript. Okay, let me start doing the JavaScript stuff. It comes into JavaScript. It says, okay, he declared a function, but he didn't call it. He declared a function, but he didn't call it. Okay, he is calling the build function. That's great. He's created this new first car, this new final car. All right, now I'm going to go look and see if I can find an element that has car engine as the ID. I can't find it. The reason I can't find it is I haven't gotten to that part of the HTML file yet. So what you have to do with this type of JavaScript, this is generally bad practice, but with this type of JavaScript without the closures, you have to move the JavaScript file to the bottom of your page so that you can get access to it.
And how does a closure work?
So a closure works by, you'd probably still have this issue for the moment. So the closure would work by, it doesn't actually call anything until everything is loaded. But in this case, that actually wouldn't even solve this issue. What you would have to do is have a higher order. So instead of doing, document.getElement by ID car engine, what I would really want to do is say document.getElement probably body, and then I would want to traverse the body tree to find an element of a particular that has this ID, and say wait until that is loaded, and when that has loaded, then I want you to set its inner text to be this.
Do people do that on the whole page? So like hold the scripts until all HTML and CSS is loaded?
Yeah, they will. So in the case of, Angular, for example, the way it does that is it says, I want you to declare the highest level element that you want to care about, and I'm going to put a script on that. And after that gets called, which is say I realize that that div exists, then and only then am I going to load up all my JavaScript and actually start doing things. In many cases, I think still people who are just using JavaScript like in this pure format, and this is what I used to do, you just put it at the bottom of the file. It's not that big of a deal. But yeah, that's all it was. But yeah.
This rubber ducky icon, is that for debugging? Or?
No, the rubber ducky, it's called Duck FTP, CyberDuck. It's just an FTP client for connecting to FTP and S3 and other things. We do integrations with schools over FTP and S3, and so it's just an easy way to get to their stuff to see. So, but. just to make this even more. So that's where JavaScript gets interesting. So this is essentially like I selected the Super Sport edition to begin with, and I want to switch to the standard, so I click on the standard button and it swaps out my attributes.
Should we change the text on the button as well once it switches?
We could, so we could say, now, the problem is we only did it in the one direction, so we'd have to have it swap to the other way, but that's a simple example. But yeah, you totally could make it swap back and forth between them.
Are you just teaching the evening classes in?
Yes. It's just too hard. I have a real job too, so it's like, you know, too hard to do all of it. Yeah, so Vishal, if you look, if I refresh the page, I have this set up now so that it starts with an engine of 1,000 horsepower, body Super Sport, doors 2. And when you click on the standard button, it switches it so the engine is 500, standard, doors are 4, and now you have the Super Sport button. So that's what we're trying to get to. That's the type of interactivity we're trying to get to.
Right. Can you show me the index.html?
Yeah, so the reason why it wasn't working before is that with JavaScript, if you want it to be able to access an element, you have to define the script that's trying to access that element after the element loads on the page. So I had to move the index.js to the bottom of our file. But yeah, so we're just starting with, I'm being very explicit, and in my HTML I'm saying the car engine is 1,000 horsepower, car body is Super Sport, and then it has 2 doors. But when I click on the button, it changes the content of all of those divs to be what our new car is, which is, in our case, going to be, because we're building an Engine A car, it's going to be standard.
So there are times where it'll be in the head, and there are times it'll be at the bottom of the body.
It should always really be in the head. The issue is that when your script, when it's loading, it automatically tries to make those changes. It needs to wait for those elements to load. So you can either put an on-load listener that'll wait for an element to load before you actually start executing the other code,
Right.
or you can move it to the bottom, or you can do something that's a little bit more like, in this case, I actually can revert it back probably and put it back in the top, because no code actually executes against any of the elements until you click on the button, at which point they are already loaded. So like if I move, except for the button itself. So yeah, so I'd still have to wait for the button to actually load before I can do it. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and push this. If you've been following along, make sure you git add dot git commit -m, put a message in. And then I'm going to git push.
Git add.
So it's git add dot,
Yep.
and then git commit -m, and then in quotes some message. So the -m is an attribute. You'll see this in command line a lot of the time. It's the same as like the -a they were using previously. So you do the command. So it's git commit, which is the command, and then -m is a flag saying it's a parameter basically, as we've been talking about it with these functions. It's saying pass me some value. So we're saying -m, which is a message, and we're going to pass it the value of whatever we put in quotes.
And we want a space between git commit and dash.
Yes, correct.
Cool.
And then git push origin and the name of your branch, and then git status, and it should say on branch, your branch name, nothing to commit, working true clean. And if you can get to that point, then you can git checkout master. So it should say on branch, whatever branch name is, nothing to commit. You want to play it? So are you all able to get back on a master in a clean state? Yep, cool. Okay, so then once you're there, we can git checkout -b, and we'll call it, so your name -box model. And again, if you go back to Atom, so Atom is not always very good about switching the content out. So if your content doesn't look like it's back to normal where we have index.html, which is a very simple thing, we have index.js that just says console.log hello, and index.css that just has a single red class in it, then you probably want to close your tabs and reopen them. And if it asks you to save, click don't save, and then you should be back in a good spot.
Okay. So if it has a color,
Yeah, so for example, you probably shouldn't have that, so just exit out of it. Just close all of these tabs. That's fine. So if you go back to index.css, yeah, it's just a little slow about updating sometimes. Alright, so what we're going to start talking about today is block versus inline elements. Does anybody know what these are yet? Probably read about them so far. What's the difference between these?
Don't remember.
Yep.
a block elements go on top of each other,
Yep.
and inline goes beside each other.
Yeah, that's right. So block elements just go on top of each other, whereas inline elements go beside each other. Most of the inline elements are things related to text. So if you're trying to do bold or italics, that type of thing, then it's probably inline. Just as an example, so a div is a what type of element? Block or inline? Yeah, they're going to go on top of each other or next to each other?
They're on top of each other.
Yeah, they're going to go on top of each other, so it's a block element. So if we go back to our page, you see how they go on top of each other. Now, if I put in a strong tag, Is that going to make strong go underneath of this is A?
Look,
No.
No, because it's an inline element. Okay. If I use span, is span an inline or a block element?
Inline.
Yeah, so if I do span strong instead of strong, you see it still stays there. We can do the same thing with italics. Okay, so yeah, so most of our inline outside of span are going to be things that have to do with text-based things, usually. Most other elements are going to be block elements, especially all the semantic elements that we went over in some of the first classes. All of those are going to be block elements. Paragraphs are block elements. So most of the time things go on top of each other. Now that's not always an ideal situation, so we'll talk about how to get ourselves in a place where we can use div elements next to each other. Next thing we're going to talk about is the box model. Does anybody remember what the box model is?
element, pattern, order, and margin.
Yes, that is all the pieces of it. So if I were to, let's say that we go into our index.html, I'm just going to create a couple of divs that are very simply have the content of A and B. You can kind of see what's going on.
Are divs still commonly used
Mhm.
in HTML better?
Yeah.
Is it-
Yeah, so they probably shouldn't be used as frequently as they are now that we have semantic elements. The reason why that I think they are is if you're using a framework like React or Angular, what you're typically doing is creating your own semantic elements that do something functional. So for example, I might create a calendar element that I've written all the code for so that it shows up as a calendar and it's scrollable and you can click on it and it chooses a date and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so I might have written that with divs, but it's a very small amount of code. It's only like 20 lines of code or so. And when you're using the calendar component or directive they're called, you would just do something like, and then the calendar would just show up there. So you use semantic elements in the larger context, but divs still get used frequently when you're creating the small code because it's small.
So you would create the class or the ID, mostly probably class, on calendar.
Yeah, so then you would put classes on calendar. Yeah. So for the moment though, we're just going to have two divs. They're going to represent our boxes for us. So we have div A and we have div B. And if we go back and look at them, right now there's nothing crazy happening, right? We can inspect these. So if you right click on A and click inspect, you'll see there's my div. If I click on the second one, we can see div B. What you'll see is the box model that Josh was talking about here previously. So we have a margin. And does anybody remember what margin does?
Yeah, it's the space around the element.
Yeah.
So it's added inside.
It's added.
Added around the content.
Yep.
The margins outside the border.
That's right. So yeah, you can think about the margin as pushing the element away from the other things that are around it, so it's creating space outside of the element. The border is the border, and that largely I think makes sense to us. The padding is the space between the content, so in our case A or B, and the border. Okay. So that's what padding is, and we'll go through and actually demonstrate these here. So we're going to go ahead and start by giving a color to each of our divs. So let's create a class. We'll just call it box A, and then we'll give the second one a class of box B. So if I want to start styling our box A div, how do I do that?
Just do dot,
Yep.
box A.
Yep. Okay. And if I want to give it a back, yeah. So let's start with a background color. How do I?
Background color.
Yep. Yep. And let's just make it green so it's nice and visible. Okay, so and if I go back, just take a look. Oh,
Save FF.
Looks safe. Box A, background color green. HTML, index and CSS. Oh, that's interesting. Let me try this. Oh, oh. What is this? So something else is overriding a background color.
You have something in the
Oh, hold on. Invalid property value. Oh. There's no quotes. There we go. Syntax, it's hard. Okay, so we have.
Sweating.
Yeah.
What is going on here? Okay, so we have background color, which is green. It's taking up the entire thing, right? And if we
Make our box B be red. They're touching each other,
right, like they're actually right on top of each other, but our background color is taking up all everything. So our background color is going to be in.
It's going to be taking over everything that's in our content and in our padding. It's basically everything up into the border. Okay, and we can see that. So if we want to add a border, so that we can see this a little bit more explicitly, well, how would we add a border?
You just leave it as border with a colon.
Yep.
And specify the width.
So let's say 1 pixel, and then
Style, like solid.
yep.
And then the color.
So let's say blue, and then we'll do the same thing here, and we'll make it orange. That's not the most.
So-
easy thing.
I came across this of what is like 1 pixel to 100 pixels, like what's the range?
It's literally a pixel. A pixel. So there's no range on the border. You can make it 1 billion pixels. It's just so a pixel is literally a pixel on the screen. They are pretty equivalent most of the time to like point sizes. So like if you think of a 14-point font, the size of the height of a 14-point font, that's pretty close to 14 pixels
Okay.
in terms of size.
Sure.
Can I take the HTML?
Yep.
On that pixel point, does it change if the screen is a different resolution?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
But not enough for it to be, like, you don't change the way that you size things?
You can. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Yep. A lot of times people don't. A lot of times people will use static pixel-based sizing. And that generally ends up okay. But there are certain times when that just doesn't work out at all. So, all right. So we have our background is taking up everything that's inside of our content and our padding. And then we have our border, and then our margin would be on the outside of each of these boxes. But we can see we don't have any margin currently, which is why these are dashes, and we don't have any padding currently, which is why these are dashes. So if we wanted to create space on the inside of our box, what's the thing we need to change?
Say it again.
So if we want to change the space on the inside of our box, so the space
Padding.
between the border and the letter A. Yeah, so padding. So let's just start by doing something like 100 pixels. Just a little crazy, but boom. So lots of space. Got plenty of room. The A looks like a hole on a green. So
And you could technically create a class for both of those, right?
yep, you could.
So they're not individually being.
Yep. The only purpose for doing them separately is so that you can see that they're different and yep. But yeah, you absolutely could apply the same class to both of them. So then let's say that we want to move them apart from one another. So we want to have some white space in between our two boxes. How would we do that?
Our old friend margin.
Our old friend margin. So let's try to do that with box B. So we'll say 20 pixels margin, and you see now it's creating margin, it's pushing itself out relative to the other things that are there. Now the way that we've implemented padding and margin here is applying it to all four sides. And if we go look at our box model, for example, we see our margin here is 20, 20, 20, and 20 all the way around our box. And in fact, this is a nice little helper in the inspect tool. As you highlight the element, it shows you your entire box model. So you can see in orange, this is your margin. This is the space being created by your margin. Or if we go to our other div, it's green on green, so it's a little hard to see. But the highlighted piece here is showing you where your pattern is. So if we go over here, you can see like this stuff. So this isn't highlighted because this isn't part of our padding, but everything else between there and the border is. So it helps you to actually visualize what your padding and your margin is doing. All right. So the way that we've implemented margin and padding though currently is to put it all the way around, the same amount all the way around. What if I just want to have, for box B for example, to have a margin that is separating it from box A, but I don't want to have margins on the left and right and bottom?
Center.
So center, actually vertical centering is a really hard thing to do, which is essentially what you'd be suggesting there. We'll talk about that with Flexbox stuff, but how would I do this with it? You can do it with margin, but there's a...
Go to margin top.
You can do margin top, which is one way to do it.
Or could you put the number and then 0, 0, 0?
Yep, so the other way to do it, so we see margin top does it. The other way to do it is you have 4 parameters essentially that a margin can take. So it goes top, right, bottom, left. So we can do, let's say, 20 pixels, and then you can actually shortcut 0. What this says is I want 20 pixels on the top and 20 pixels on the bottom, but I want 0 pixels on the right and left. Or you could do 20 pixels, 0, 0, 0. Which is going to say I want 20 pixels on the top.
And that's how it goes, right? Top, bottom, right, left?
Top, right, bottom, left. But when there's only 2, it does top and bottom, left and right.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's 3.
Yeah, that'll break, I think. We can try
It
it.
doesn't. Then it goes.
Oh, does it go top, right,
top,
bottom?
right and left.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, all right. Yeah, okay. Well, we can find out. Hold on. Let's just do it. So 10... 30, just so they're all different. And if we do that, then what we end up with is so yeah, it does top and bottom because the last one is left off, and so, or it does left and right because it only sees one of them. Yeah, so that's interesting. Especially because, like, how would you do the same thing for just top and bottom? Like, you can't just have 3 for just top and bottom. So, anyway, weird implementation, but yeah. So that's interesting. But yeah, so that's the idea around the box model. So your padding is between your content and your border, and you have your border. Between your border and other elements, you have your margin. Questions about that? Another important point here is that when we're talking about HTML, everything is a box. Everything is always a box. Even when things are circles, they're still a box. Okay, so when you create circles, oftentimes all the person is doing is changing the border radius of the element so that it doesn't look like a sharp arrow, but instead it's curved.
CSS or via HTML?
Yeah, you do it with CSS. So we can actually do so let's say border radius is 45 pixels. You see how it started around? And so I can increase the border radius to whatever extent I need to so that it becomes a symmetrical all the way around. But that's generally how circles are actually made. Even the, like if you've seen like little tabs like bookmarks, for example, which are just like the corner of a box that's cut off, so it looks like it's a triangle, for example. That is actually just clipping a box, generally speaking. So everything is a box, though, in the end, when we're doing HTML stuff. Questions about that? We can have boxes inside of boxes, we can have boxes next to boxes, we can have boxes on top of boxes, but everything is a box.
Right, so can you, I think I know how to do it, but can you move the B box next to A via HTML? Just to show me.
Yeah, so we're going to get into that in just a minute, but we could. So one way to do it pretty simply, although the CSS has probably made it too large for this at this point. Let's make it. I'm going to change the width on these guys so that they're a little bit smaller. Oh, jeez. Just make it.
Is that matching?
Yeah, the padding actually, I think, but let's see.
So, and I came across EM is what?
So EM is, we're going to get into that in just a second too. So, but I've already started with, so view width. So there are several different ways of sizing things in your CSS. You can use pixels, which is probably the most common, which is based on the number of pixels space that it's going to take up. It's a static thing. It's going to be essentially the same amount of space on all of your devices, assuming that if your phone is 1080p and your desktop is 1080p and you use 14 pixels, it's going to take up about the same amount of space, which is why like font, for example, is something that people frequently will just use pixels to size with, because as you move from device to device, you largely want the font to stay about the same size. Right? It doesn't matter if I have a book that's this big or a book that's this big, I can still read something that's about 14-point font. And so I want to just say it's 14 pixels.
And that's PX.
That's PX.
Yeah.
View width is, so let's start with percentage actually first, because this is the older way. People are more commonly going to use percentages. So if I don't want to have an explicit width on something, or explicit height, but I want it to be a percentage of its container, like whatever it's inside of, then I can use a percentage. So I can say I want to be 50% of my containing box's width, right? Or I can be 100% of my containing box's width.
Got it. So you'll, okay.
So that's when a box is inside of a box. View width is based on the entire view device width. So for example, I could have a box. So when we're talking about percentages, let's say that this is my entire screen, and I have a box that I've set to be 500 pixels, for example. And then inside of that box, I have another box that I've set to have a width of 50%. Well, it doesn't take up 50% of my entire screen, it just takes up 50% of the width of its containing data. If I wanted this to take up 50% of my entire view, then you use view width, which will then say, okay, despite the fact that this is inside of this other div, I actually want it to take up, let's say it's 80 view width, I actually want it to take up a full 80 view width. So even though it's inside of this other thing, I want it to be bigger than the thing it's containing. So that's what view width does. EMs are based on the current sizing of your base font at that location. And we'll go through this a little bit later and through your exercises, but essentially, most of the time we're starting with an EM of 1. And so as long as our font size is at that 1 base, then EMs work pretty similar to PX. But what you can do with EMs is you can say, okay, I want my font size to increase to 1.2, and then I want anything that's sized based on EMs to proportionally size itself. So essentially increase everything by 25%. So essentially if I'm increasing my base from 1 to 1.2, I want everything that's sized in EMs to increase.
So EM would be better if you're in a platform to your cell phone, you have a website to cell phone.
Yeah, potentially. So if you're moving, so if you are moving from website to cell phone and you want the font size to get bigger on your cell phone, and as that font size increases, you want the boxes that contain that font to get bigger, then EMs are a great way to go. Okay. REM is the same concept, except that it's
it's relative to the root as opposed to relative to where the context is currently. So REM is based on whatever your highest level font size is set to.
It's like H1.
It's,
No, not so much.
yeah, it's not going to be H1 based. It's going to be
Okay.
your font base size, which is going to be, so again, typically 1.
And that's going to be in the meta, in the head,
It'll be in your CSS.
in your CSS.
Yeah, so it defaults to 1. You can change what it is. We'll go over some examples of that in a moment.
Sure. Cool.
But that's what it is. So basically, percent and VW are pretty close to one another, except the percent is about inside of my container. VW is about across the entire view.
Okay.
PX is about an explicit static number of pixels. And then EM and RM are about relative to the font size, the sizing of my font. All right. So we'll go through some of those examples again in a minute. Let's talk about overflow though for the moment. So if we go back to our box model, let's go ahead and just put box B inside of box A. And we get something like this. This actually works out pretty well. So we see that our B box is going outside of our A box a little bit. Let's go ahead and make that even worse. So we're going to make our box B have a height of 80 VH, which is view height. So it's really big. We're going to set the box A height to be 10 VH. Set the max height because it's good. All right. So we have our height set. B currently is still taking over, or box A rather is still getting really big with our box B, but we've set a height now explicitly for box A, and so if we want it to be an overflow situation where it scrolls instead of expanding with the rest of the content, we should be able to just overflow, in our case, X. Whoa. Box A, box B. Okay, these are colors. Let's see, background.
You changed the box to
Yeah,
dash.
it's a dash. Spelling hard. Okay. So now we see box A is way up here, box B is down here. If we go and hover over, we'll see, okay, here's box A, here's box B. Box B is technically inside of box A, but box A isn't big enough to keep up. So we are going to use overflow to allow it to do that. There are several options for overflow. We'll start with hidden. So when we do overflow hidden, it goes away because you can't see it entirely because it's just too big. If we make the height a little bit bigger, so if we move it to be like 40 VH, I swear it's just like, oh. So there you can see part of it, but it's cutting it off at this point where it says, okay, anything that is going outside of my height, I don't want to show it at all. I just want to cut it off. So this is a way that you can create like interesting geometric shapes and that type of thing. It's kind of fun. Most of the time what you're actually trying to do here is you have some content. Yeah, so you have like some text that you want people to be able to scroll within. So you can change this from hidden to scroll. And then we can scroll within the container to see the rest of it. And you can see right now we can scroll both in the X direction and in the Y direction.
And scroll does that, it goes right hand. Left and up and down.
Yep, and you can change it to overflow Y scroll or overflow X scroll if you only want to be able to scroll in one direction, not the other.
Pretty good for like news article columns, stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's great for exactly that type of thing. So you might have multiple columns, and you want to be able to, like, for each news article, you've created a new column. You want to be able to scroll each news article independently. This is a great way to do it. All right. So that's overflow. Next thing we're going to talk about is float.
You know, you said.
Yeah. We'll talk about it. So if we wanted to, have you guys done the reading on this yet, the float stuff? So if I wanted to make it so that A goes next to B, let's see where we're at currently. Yeah. So if I want to make it so that A goes next to B, how do I do that?
Next to me where?
So if I want B to come up here.
Good.
Float
Body and
Float
float.
left
Yeah, so where do I put that?
in box A.
in box A.
No, you want to do it in the body, I think. Right?
Well, so actually I think this is probably just weird stuff happening. Let me just going to start with a very simple.
Probably should have put some paragraph text there.
Yeah. Let's just say 50px. Alright, so now we have our nice small boxes. I would expected that to work, actually. So it's just like, yes, this is all you should have to do. And it should be floating.
You can float B1.
We have to display in line.
Ah.
Display was without line.
Kicker, HTML.
That is what Google's for. Yeah, I don't understand why it's not.
Just wonder if you float the other one to the right instead, because it's
Yeah, we can try that. I don't know why it wouldn't be.
Is it because, I don't know if you changed it in the HTML, it was listed for 2 days?
I did change it.
Alright.
Yeah.
You're good.
So I just did it as a float right. I don't know why. It may be that I need to do this one as a float left. Nope.
Is it like they're already in the right, so you need to push them to the right?
So that is true, but
Like
I really-
if you did float right on box B, then it would be on the right?
no. So this is the float. Oh, that's interesting. But it's pushed down. It's still underneath of it. It's just floating itself right relative to whatever else would have been there. We don't have anything else underneath of it, but that's all that's happening. The float left should have worked. I'm not sure what.
Still display block. Does the float?
So that's just because div is always display block. That's just the browser giving it the display block.
in line in order to float.
So I mean, we tried that, right? So yeah, I agree that is a way that we potentially. Oh, let me just see if I can get float left example.
Do you put an image tag on that in HTML?
No, so the image, that's just an example of doing this, but there's no reason why it should matter. Yeah, It's either floating left. I have a set of code right here.
Is it because you didn't say like the default is to be at 100%, so you don't say that it's smaller than that, and you can't put anything beside it?
Well, but the width is, it should be small enough. I'll play with it here in a second, see if I can make it work. But that largely should have worked. The reason why this becomes something of a hack is when you'll see this with the clear fix. So we'll do clear both. So for example, if I change our HTML to look something like this. So we have our header, our sidebar, content, and a footer. And then we look at what that looks like. They're all sitting on top of each other like they should be because they're displaying them like, you know what, I wonder what's happening. I wonder if it's just, that could have been all it was. All right, so now let's just say that I want to make our aside float to the left of our article. So let's say I want to do aside float left. So it works perfectly. I think a lot of the stuff that's been screwing with us is just I was zoomed in too much and it didn't know how to deal with things correctly. So I've zoomed in to like give you guys better context of what was going on, and I may have done that in a weird way and it was just messing with what's going on. Yeah. I can't explain it in any other way. This is how it's, I mean, there's nothing special about what I just did compared to what we had on the page.
So float overrides the fact that it's a block element. It says, I don't care what you've got there.
Yeah.
We're going to try and do it.
We're going to try and, yeah, float left to whatever else is next to you. Yeah. So, but then, and then we have our footer that's still sitting down here a little bit.
So you could do a paragraph on content, right? To break it down?
So if you
Or you can make it a different header.
if you wanted it to go back, so you're saying you want content to go back underneath the sidebar?
Yeah.
Or so I mean, you know, we could just not float left aside.
Okay.
So like that goes back, right? So by default it works that way. But if I want a side to come up, or if I want article to come up next to a side, then I need to be able to float a side to the left so that content comes up to the right. So what if we wanted to, like we could start to actually build out this page, we could put some essentially lorem ipsum text in here, right? And we're starting to get something to build out. And then in our sidebar, maybe we start to have, maybe we want to put a list in there. So UL, we start to build out our menu. Right, so now we're starting to get something that looks a little bit like a website, right? So we have our side menu, we have our header, and we have our footer that's sitting over here. Now our footer is moved over a little bit relative to the sidebar. So if you do clear both on something that is in this like float situation, it'll drop it back to where it's supposed to be. It basically says, stop doing whatever floating stuff that you were doing ahead of me. I just want to go back to being a regular HTML page.
Clear and clear fix are the same.
Clear fix, yeah, it will do the same thing. It's the same concept. Questions about that? But clear both is saying clear both the right and left floats if there are any, and just go back to being a regular website. Cool.
Yeah. So can you create a nav bar on top?
Yeah, so then if we wanted to do that, we need float again, right? So let's go, so my OCD won't allow me to leave this like this for too long. So if we wanted to have a nav bar, we also want to create a list generally, and you would change your header out to be the list. But of course that does this, which isn't really what we want. So what you could do is say, Well, how would you? Let me let you try.
So do nav instead of UL?
We can do nav. Really, that's more about instead of doing header, we should probably do nav.
Okay, so do nav there. It should go.
And it doesn't, because remember, semantic elements, they just help us to read the code. They don't actually do anything to the
So if we
issue.
go to CSS and do nav and do text line center. I know you don't do that.
No, that's fine. So we need text align center.
Right. So it should bring it all. Okay.
So that does
We
that.
also want to float it like a nav bar on the top, right?
Yeah, so if we wanted to do that, how would we do that? What's the,
Float.
so what do we float though?
You want to display in line?
So we can display in line probably the whole list, but what
So the nav is what we want to float, right?
well, not exactly right. So the nav, if we float the nav, right? So like, let's look at a side in article, right?
Sure.
So we are floating a side to the left,
Mhm.
and then article comes next to a side, right?
Okay.
So if we look at nav is at the same level as a side.
Mhm.
So if we float left nav, what's going to happen is a side is going to come up next to nav. But that's not really what we're trying to do, right? We want the things inside of nav to be floated next.
Do we need to create a div then?
Well, so we already have essentially that because we have our ULs and our LIs.
Okay.
Really, what are we trying to float next to each other? That's what we need.
Menu items.
Yeah, the menu items, right? So right here we have each of these LIs are on top of each other, and we want to float them next to each other.
Right.
So really what we need is a selector for these LIs to say float them left.
Got it. So within UL, you can make a class.
So you could create a class. So we could say,
Within
well, you could do it here even. So class is,
center.
Yeah.
well, we could do center. We're not really trying to center these though in the end. I mean, we might also do that, but really what we're trying to do is get them like next to each other. We get, so classes you can do in a variety of ways. We've largely been doing it based on the attribute that we're changing, but you can also to create a class based on what you want it to be.
So you can name
So-
it Vishal. V-I-S-H.
Yeah. So we could do, yep, that's fine. I'm just going to do show list just so we're clear about what we're doing.
Okay.
And then if we come in here,
Dot.
yep,
Vishal list.
yep, and then,
center or text align. No. Float. Shit.
so we still don't want to float this though, right? Because floating the UL, there's nothing even next to it, so nothing is going to really happen if we float that.
Right.
We want to float the LIs that are inside of the shawl list. So how do we select the LIs that are inside of the shawl list?
Space LI.
Yeah, the descendant selector, which is space LI.
Okay.
And then we can do float left. And maybe this one. Yeah. Boom. Okay. So now the problem is we've gotten back to this issue of we have all these things that are floating that we don't actually want to float. And I think if we do something like that, it got us a little closer. So now you have to go back through and clear out the floating that you don't want to happen from the other things, and this is where floating gets really complicated and frustrating. Because we'll go over next class what Flexbox looks like and how to do this exact same thing in Flexbox, and it's trivial. It's so trivial to make this actually happen.
So this is like, we should not do it this way.
Yeah, ideally, yeah. You wouldn't do it this way.
I'm sorry for asking.
No. I mean, it's still, because you're going to come across this there's still plenty of websites that have, this is the way that they set it up. It's just that it's not as simple. So when you get to Flexbox, you would just say display flex for the UL that we're trying to create, and then you would just, that's it. Actually, in that case, it's done. You do display flex and it'll just do it. In fact, we can probably do it quickly. So if instead of floating left, let's just delete it, go back, and we'll see that it looks like this. And then I believe if we just do display flex, boom. Right? It's that simple. Right? So we can go through the process of figuring out how to clear our floats out, or we can just do it this way and not have to worry.
And then if we have
Yep.
my one last question was that, so when we create these menu items, right, we got a nav bar going on. If you click on one of them, how do we make it?
Oh, right. It's because I skipped that. Yep. Okay. So if
Did we learn about Flexbox or
not yet.
Oh,
Yeah, that's like so. Next, the class that you're about to read for, we'll talk about it for the first time.
okay.
Yeah.
And then what else we call it, like display table, or what is it?
So there's display table, which is another way of doing something similar to this. Again, just use display flex. As we go through, as you read through it next time, and as we go through it in next class, you'll see that with display flex, you can create essentially a table. So you can say, I want to have rows and columns, and it just works pretty beautifully. So
Why not like positions? Like
so the position, the absolute positions, yeah. So that was the next thing on my list. But so positions are about really moving things on the page as the page loads relative to their actual position is. So for example,
so if you had your nav in a div, like in a border,
Yeah.
you couldn't do the same thing you were doing with that Flexbox just by setting a position to it.
no, so position does something different.
Okay.
So what position will do is, so you can see here, the menu one, this menu one right here, the div that's in, the LI, it lands here on the page, right? So its position when it's loading would normally be right here. So you could position relative it and then say top 100. And what that'll do is it'll take it from where it normally would have landed and it'll push it down 100 pixels.
Mhm.
You can do the same thing with absolute, but absolute is based on like your whole screen. So you could say absolute, so 100 relative is, so let's say
Like coordinates or whatever.
yeah, so like relative to here, right? So you could then push it absolutely to a position on the page so that it sticks there. And as you scroll your page, it'll stay right there on your screen. So absolute positioning is something that's frequently used
I thought
for.
that was fixed. That it stays on your screen.
So fixed, it'll keep going. It'll go with your screen.
Okay,
It'll
so
go off your
absolute, it will
screen.
still be wherever you left it.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolute.
that's true.
Absolute will leave it where it is.
Yeah.
Fixed will go off your screen. The last one, so static is what happens normally. So that's just where these things are.
Right. So essentially, so wouldn't it look the same as the Flexbox?
No. So what you'll find is, so if you were trying to, let's see, so let's say that you tried to do absolute positioning of these elements onto your page. What happens is, as you make the page bigger and smaller, they'll start to be on top of each other, and you start to run into all kinds of issues around like what, you know. So like I absolute positioned this thing to be 100 pixels to the right, and that's fine when there's enough room for it to be 100. So this one's 100 pixels, this one's 50, this one's 20, right? But when I make the screen small enough, then these things are like,
Gotcha.
they're right on top of each other.
Gotcha.
Especially if you did it with a percentage, right? So if you did it with, so it just, they start to smash on top of each other. With Flexbox, you can make it, I didn't do this part of it, but there's another attribute that you can add that'll allow you to justify the content apart from each other. So you can basically say, I want all of my items to use what's called space around, in which case they'll equally space out and put space between themselves, and it's just one more thing. The positioning relative and absolute and fixed is really about, oftentimes it's about like, so one example is that avatar that I had up earlier. I actually have one of these, that's funny. So like this avatar, you see this little one that's down here? Let me see if there's a better. So here you can see there's the big gray circle and then there's a small red circle. What we're doing here is this circle actually starts in the exact same spot as K does in the middle here. So K is a square. It's one of our boxes that we've done around a border radius on to make it look like a circle. And its box is this piece right here, right? When we created this second avatar, it's actually right underneath of that box, right? Because it's a div, so it has to go somewhere. So really, if these were two boxes, it would be like this.
Well, I need, if I want them to overlay like this, I need to push the one box up relative to where it would normally be so that it creates this what looks like a cutout. So you do a position relative on this with a bottom of 40 pixels, and it pushes it up over top of the div that's there, which makes it look like that. So that's like a reason for using position. You might use position absolute for something more like having a menu bar that stays at the top of your screen, so it's there all the time and like things scroll underneath of it.
Right.
Position absolute would allow you to do something like that. So that's the reason for those guys. And then z-index has to do with the out of the screen. So if, for example, when I had gone to create these, if I wanted, instead of the top, if I wanted this little icon to be behind the other icon, I can use a z-index to push this one behind, and then you would see the entirety of the bottom icon, and you'd see that this icon would be cut right here.
The higher the z-index, the closer it is to you.
The higher the z-index is, the closer it is to you, so essentially you can take it out and over the other div. Make sense?
Yep.
So yeah, z-index positioning.
So you do the z-index on the red image, correct?
Yeah, so let's see if,
Not on the,
not 100% sure this is just going to work, but we'll give it a shot. So if I go into this guy and I say z index, yeah, see how it comes out in front?
perfect, yeah. Cool.
You can also use negative z indexes, so in our case it won't matter because it's already behind stuff,
Right.
but you can go negative or positive. So I could just as easily, I guess, to show that if you inspect the smaller one,
So you use that one.
then I can z-index to the negative, and you see it still pushes it behind it.
So either one of those works.
And what, can you do positive 1,000 on
Yeah, so if you do a positive 1,000 on it, it'll just bring it back to the front, which is
Oh, yeah.
essentially the same as being
that?
zero.
But it's not going to change the size of.
So z-indexing just does relative to the things that it's positioned on top of or behind.
Got it.
So I can do the same thing.
I can move it behind that other image just as easy with -1,
Yeah, right.
2, something pretty small. Am I still on that same thing? So the avatar from the framework that I'm using must have the z-index for the avatar set relatively high, but generally speaking, you just have to do something pretty small to get it to go back. Most of the time, the z-index is 0 or 1 on the elements of the frame. So like a z-index of 2 could move you positionally relative.
Cool.
All right. Yeah. So this is another use case actually for using positioning. So here we're doing an absolute position over this card, and what it's positioning is actually that gradient. So you see how there's like a gray gradient that's making the letters pop out here. If I remove the CSS on this, it looks like that. You see how so the words are all down here because there's two divs. The first div is the image, the second div is the words. And I want to move them up on top of this image. There's also another div that is my gradient, and I want to move it also up on top of this image. So I'm going to position absolute these things up relative to where they are on the page.
Is that something that people typically do in JavaScript versus just design?
No, so this is more commonly done in CSS than it would be done on JavaScript.
So that would be bottom, right? You would push from the bottom.
Yeah, so let's see, how are we actually doing this one? So here we have the text container, which has position absolute, yeah, and then we're doing a bottom for the text itself, so it's moving it from the bottom up to 25 pixels.
Is this in our, what's it called? Can you screenshot that?
Yeah, I can put this in Slack and pin it, the whole thing. So there's a few examples there that are worth looking at, including basically your a typical website where you have a header and a footer and some content in between. So that's basically what this is doing here. It's pushing the header all the way to the top, the footer all the way to the bottom, and then letting you do whatever you want in the middle. So it's a good way to start a little website. But all that we have to do to make that happen is we say display flex. We say the flex direction, which by default is row, which is why our menu items went next to each other as though they were in a row. I changed that in this case to be column, so they go back to being on top of each other. And then you say justify content. And this is what I was talking about before. In this case, it's space between. I was talking about space around. But space between says give me as much space in between each other as possible. So force the header to the top and the footer to the bottom, put the content in the middle. So this is that.
So in the HTML, you've got a div class above the header, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Which is just
okay.
applying this flex container. So when you create the flex class, the display flex, what it's really doing is applying the styles to any element inside of it.
Right, so they could easily also have been div ID header, right?
Here? Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, this could be a this could be a paragraph. Yeah, I just use, again, header is just because it's not the right kind of a thing, but it could be a div.
Right, what I'm saying is that ID would be, so if it is just on the header, we could do it as an ID for the header, correct?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you could. Absolutely. I think more likely the way that you're going to end up, so yes, absolutely, you could do that. In that case, more likely what you're going to do is you're going to create, instead of a flex container class, you're going to create a row class, and then you would whoops. You see, so what I've done is I created a row class and I applied it to my header, what used to be my header, and now anything that I put in there becomes a column inside my row. And then you can reuse that row class anywhere that you want to have columns. But yeah, so we'll get into that a little bit more in the next class. There are quite a few labs in this section. Most people already completed. I know several people were already ahead. But most people completed the labs up to so far, and including week 3, group 1, which is basically everything. Let's see.
So there's 3 labs, right?
Yeah, there's 3, I think.
Yeah, I didn't do the labs. I just watched that.
Okay.
I did the quiz.
Yeah, so everything through box style. So these 2 sections, we're going to get, there's these 3 labs and then the box style lab. Have people completed these yet? It doesn't,
No.
it doesn't matter. You weren't supposed to have. I just,
I didn't do the
Yeah.
labs.
okay, okay. So we'll take the last 15 minutes. We were supposed to have a little bit more time for this today, but we got to go through a lot of stuff, a lot of content, so I think it's okay. But we'll take the last 15 minutes to go through those. For next class, for homework, it's just reading through responsive page layout and CSS Flexbox and Grid, and then we'll do those next class. Okay.
So rather than doing can you show me how to, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah.
Pertinent and insistent on this. Can you show me
Yeah.
how to create a link within a web page?
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry.
It's cool, it's cool.
Yeah. So I just keep getting distracted by other things. Okay. So if you want to create a link within a
You can
website,
create a new file, right?
yeah, you do. So you can name it whatever you want .html.
Does
So
it have to be within index or aside from it? It doesn't matter.
So it needs to be, it can be anywhere that you want also. You're just going to have to do relative pathing to get to it.
Sure.
So for example, I could create a directory, and this is going to be,
Let's keep it simple. Let's
Okay.
just make a file.
sure. So if we just make the file, there's about.html. It's at the same level as index.html.
Okay.
If I open up about.html, it has stuff, I guess I copied it as opposed to whatever. But we can just get it back to basics. So I'm just going to have it say the word about inside of it. And then in index.html, let's say we're going to use our first menu item.
Okay.
And we need to put about inside that link. And then when we click on about, it's going to take us to the about.html page. So then if I wanted to, I could like, let's see if we can make, so let's go back. So we're on our index page. It looks a little bit more right, just because I did the space around. But maybe now we just want to copy index.html. Let's just make this something a little bit more like a real website. So we'll make the first link be home, and that's going to go to index.html. And then the second link is about. So now we have home and about. I'm already on home, but I can click it and it'll reload the page. If I click on about, it takes me to the about page, but I can click on home and go back to the home page.
And can you go back to your, yeah, so, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Awesome.
that's it. Yeah, you just, so, and then if you wanted to put things for organization purposes inside of a folder, I'll just create a third one because we need another thing anyway. Create a folder called pages or something. And then inside of there, let's just create a, I don't know, what's another thing? Contact us. So create a contact.html. And then in our index.html, so in this case, it's the same pathing that you use when you're inside of the terminal.
Okay.
So if I open up the terminal and we go take a look, so LS, I can see all my files. I've got an index.html, right?
Slash, okay.
So I'm going, yeah, so I'm in index.html and I want to path to pages contact.html, right? And so I can see pages are right here. So if I type cat is a word, it'll print out the file. So if I like right where I am right now, I can cat index.html and it'll show the whole file.
Oh, cool.
So I want to cat pages contact.html. So to get there, it's pages/contact.html. And if I press enter, I can see it actually comes out. So that's my path. My path is this thing right here. So if I copy that, then I can put it right there. Now, so we'll copy this and we'll put it into the about.html because it's at the same level as index.html. But when we want to create our links from contact.html back to index.html, this link isn't going to work anymore. Right? Because if I go back, so if we go to the contact page, you'll see we're now in /pages/contact.html. And if I want to go back home though, I don't go back home because you can see even in the URL actually where it's taken me is to pages/index.html, but there isn't. So if I cd into pages and I ls, there is no index.html in here, right? Because this is in here. There's no index.html.
Right.
So if I want to link,
Put it back in.
So if I want to link up to index.html, it's the same way that I am my terminal would get there. So it's /index.html.
So dot gets you up.
Dot gets you up.
Okay.
So now what I'd want to do is the contact, yeah. /index.html and also about.html. Because about.html is also one up. But now if I click on it, you see the pages / goes away and we're just back up to index.html.
Cool.
Yep. That's it. That's the whole thing. You do want to use relative paths. So there, a lot of the time when people create their website for the first time, they'll put them up on a domain like sambirk.com. And then instead of doing relative pathing, you can do absolute pathing.
Right.
So they'll write, http://pages/about.html. All of
Essentially
this.
creating a new website page.
Yeah, because it's a new website page, and so when it's up there, that link totally works. The problem with absolute pathing is that if I change my domain, like I want to host this now not at sambirk.com, but at sambirk.org, now I have to go find and replace all of my sambirk.coms. If I had used relative pathing, it would just work. Yeah.
Nice. Can I screenshot?
Yeah, I can. I'll push this. It'll be in the. So it's in the sandbox model.
So git pull,
So if you do git fetch
git fetch. Okay.
and then git space checkout space sam dash box dash model.
Git space checkout.
Space sam dash box dash model.
Okay.
So now go back to your so close this and don't save. Well, just cancel this. Just exit out of index section as well. That's it. You got it.